You're done here, Rosemary. Effective today. Dad didn't look up when he said it. I was standing in his office doorway holding a folder of contracts he'd asked me to print an hour ago. 31st floor, Manhattan behind him like wallpaper he'd chosen to make himself look bigger. I didn't move. Done, I said. Position restructuring. HR will call you. Same tone he used to cancel lunch. I was 27, 2 years at Gutierrez Capital as an administrative coordinator, which meant I filed contracts, booked conference rooms, and made sure there was always fresh coffee before the people who actually mattered walked in. My salary was $46,000 a year. My sister Geneva had just been made Chief Strategy Officer at $295,000 plus bonuses. I knew the exact number because I had printed her offer letter myself. "Is this about tonight?" I asked. That made him look up. "Tonight is Geneva's night," he said. "Keep that in mind." He stood, straightened his jacket, walked past me into the hallway. I listened to his footsteps until they disappeared. I set the folder on his desk. Then I left. My name is Rosemary Gutierrez. For as long as I can remember, I operated on one belief: stay useful, stay quiet, and stay out of the way, and eventually my family would make room for me. Not Geneva's kind of room, just enough space to exist without apology. That belief had just been terminated, along with my position. What I didn't know yet was that my grandmother Blanche had spent the last years of her life preparing for exactly this moment. She knew my dad. She knew what he would eventually do. She planned for it. I took the subway uptown. I needed the noise. By the time I got off at 72nd Street, I had made one decision. I was going to that dinner tonight. Not because anyone wanted me there, because I needed to see it. My dad standing up in front of 40 people, handing Geneva everything, the company, the assets, the future, while I sat wherever they'd put me near the back. No more guessing, no more hoping I was wrong about them. I walked 3 blocks to my grandmother's building on West 74th. Blanche had passed 8 months ago, pancreatic cancer. I was the only one in the room at the end. I'd been paying her lease month to month since then because I couldn't figure out how to pack up 60 years of someone's life and call it finished. Warren, the doorman, nodded as I pushed through the glass door. I took the elevator to the 4th floor and put my key in the lock. Before I got it open, I heard him. Binder hit the door the second it cracked. Not jumping, Blanche had trained him better, but everything else was moving. Tail, shoulders, whole back half swinging, his big square boxer face tilted up at me like I was the best thing that had happened all week. 63 pounds, brown and white, 5 years old. Blanche had named him Binder because as a puppy he'd destroyed every binder in her home office within 2 weeks. She thought it was funny. I crouched down and let him hold his head against my chest. "They fired me," I said, into the top of his skull. He stayed still. "Just let me hold on." I needed a dress. I went to Blanche's closet. Garment bags, shoe boxes, decades of a life kept in careful order. I found a simple black dress near the back, the kind she would have called appropriate without being forgettable. I was pulling it off the hanger when Binder made a sound. Not a bark, a low groan from the floor. He had his nose shoved behind the shoe rack, pawing at the baseboard, slow and deliberate, not frantic, like he'd found something and needed me to catch up. "Binder, come!" He didn't move. He sat down and looked at me over his shoulder. I crouched beside him. Behind the shoe rack, hidden under a collapsed garment bag, was a small fireproof safe, gray metal, combination lock. I had been in this apartment dozens of times since Blanche died. I had never seen it. I tried my birthday first. It opened on the first turn. Inside was one envelope, cream paper, thick, my name on the front in Blanche's handwriting, careful, unhurried, the cursive of someone who had written 1,000 contracts by hand. Rosemary, not yet. You will know when. Red wax seal on the back, notary stamp. Date, March 4th, 2021, 7 months before she died. She had used my birthday as the combination, not Geneva's, not my parents', mine. She had written not yet, which meant she had known there would be a when, a specific moment she had planned for. I put the envelope in my bag. Binder sat beside me on the closet floor, completely calm, like he had just done exactly what he meant to do. The dinner was on 57th Street, private room, 40 guests. My seat was table 9, near the service door, half behind a pillar. Geneva stood at the front, glowing in dark red, surrounded, laughing. Mom caught my eye from across the room. Her look said, "Behave." At 8:15, Dad tapped his glass. "Tonight I am proud to announce that Geneva Gutierrez will assume full ownership of my stake in Gutierrez Capital, the company, the portfolio, the legacy." Applause. Geneva covered her mouth like she was overwhelmed. Dad scanned the room. His eyes found me at table 9. No pause, no acknowledgement. He looked away and raised his glass. To Geneva. The woman next to me leaned over. "Are you with the firm?" My hand was already in my bag, fingers on the envelope, the wax seal hard under my thumb. "I'm family," I said. And for the first time in my life, I said it like it meant something. If this story hit you, hit that like button, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because Rosemary hasn't opened that envelope yet, and when she does, everything changes. The cab ride back to Blanche's apartment took 11 minutes. I counted. I needed something to count. The envelope sat in my lap the entire ride. I didn't open it at the restaurant. Something told me not to. Not there. Not in that room, with 40 people who had just toasted my erasure still clinking glasses 10 feet away. I needed to be somewhere that felt like her. Warren was still at the door when I got back, nearly 10 at night. He looked at my face and didn't ask questions, just held the door and nodded. Good man, Warren. Binder heard the elevator before I reached the 4th floor. By the time I got my key in the lock, he was already on the other side, making that low sound in his throat. Not a bark, just presence. Just, I'm here. I sat on Blanche's couch. The lamp on the side table was the only light in the room. Her reading lamp. The one she'd used every Sunday afternoon when she spread old contracts across the coffee table and walked me through them like they were maps to somewhere worth going. Binder jumped up beside me, something she never allowed, and settled his weight against my leg. I broke the seal. 3 pages, legal paper, dense type, notarized on every page. I read slowly. I've always read slowly. People in my family treated that like a flaw my whole life. Blanche treated it like I was being thorough. The heading read, Last Will and Testament of Blanche Gutierrez, executed March 4th, 2021. I kept reading. Standard language at the top. Assets, property, accounts. My dad's name appeared twice in the first paragraph, listed as executor of her 2017 will, the one everyone knew about, the one that had already been filed. Then I hit page 2. I hereby revoke all prior testamentary documents, including the will dated September 2017. This document supersedes all previous instructions, without exception. My breath stopped. I read it again. Then I read the next paragraph. To my granddaughter, Rosemary Gutierrez, I bequeath my full ownership stake in Gutierrez Capital, 54% of all outstanding shares, along with all voting rights attached thereto. 54%. Majority ownership. I sat completely still on that couch while Binder breathed steadily against my leg, and the lamp threw yellow light across 3 pages that had just changed the entire shape of my life. There was a handwritten note folded inside the back page, her stationery, the cream kind with her initials at the top. Rosemary, your father built nothing. I built everything. He has spent 20 years pretending otherwise and treating you like evidence of a weakness he invented. You are not slow, you are not less. You simply never had anyone in your corner with enough power to prove it. Now you do. The attorney's name is Nigel O'Coffer. He has held this document since the day I signed it. He is expecting your call. You have 72 hours from the moment you open this envelope to file for an emergency board meeting. If you do not act within 72 hours, the document becomes void, and the 2017 will stands. I am sorry I could not do this while I was alive. I am not sorry about what comes next. Love, Blanche. I put the letter down. Binder lifted his head and looked at me. 72 hours, I said out loud. He held eye contact the way he did when he was paying attention. I picked up my phone. It was 11:48 at night. I found Nigel O'Coffer's name in my contacts. I didn't remember saving it, but there it was, added sometime in the last year with a single note beside it. Blanche's attorney. He'll explain. I stared at his number. Here is what I knew. My dad had run Gutierrez Capital for 19 years. He had board allies, lawyers on retainer, and a reputation built on never losing. Geneva had just been publicly named his successor in front of everyone who mattered, and I was sitting on a dead woman's couch in a borrowed black dress, holding a document that made me the majority shareholder of the whole thing. I could call Nigel in the morning, I could sleep on it, I could talk myself into being reasonable, being careful, being the quiet one who didn't cause problems. I pressed call. He picked up on the second ring. Miss Gutierrez, Nigel said. His voice was calm, unhurried, the voice of a man who had been waiting for this call for 3 years. Tell me what I need to do, I said. Binder put his head back down on my leg, and I stopped waiting for my family to make room for me. Nigel O'Coffer's office was on the 22nd floor of a building on Lexington Avenue that smelled like old carpet and serious money. He was shorter than his voice suggested, late 50s, gray at the temples, the kind of calm that only comes from decades of watching powerful people panic in his presence. He shook my hand once, firm, and gestured to the chair across from his. You read everything, he said. Statement, not question. 3 times, I said. He nodded like that was the right answer. He walked me through it methodically. The 2021 will was airtight. Blanche had been examined by 2 independent physicians who certified her mental competency on the day she signed it. The document had been witnessed, notarized, and held in escrow at a firm my dad had never heard of and had no relationship with. She had thought of everything. Your father will argue she was manipulated, he said. By who? You. I almost laughed. I didn't even know this existed until last night. I know that, he said. The documentation proves that, but he will say it anyway because it's the only argument he has. He folded his hands on the desk. The question is whether you're prepared for what comes after you file. Tell me what comes after. An emergency board meeting, 7 members. You'll need to present the will. I'll authenticate it, and the board will have to formally acknowledge you as majority shareholder. He paused. Your father will be in that room. I know. Geneva may be there as well. I know. He studied me for a moment. Most people in your position take a few days to prepare themselves emotionally.
"I don't have a few days," I said. "I have 54 hours left." He allowed himself a small nod. "Then we file today." The board meeting was set for 10 a.m. 2 days later, Gutierrez Capital, 31st floor, the same floor where my dad had fired me without looking up from his desk. I spent the time in between at Blanche's apartment. I didn't go back to my own place. I needed to be in her space, around her things, close to whatever version of her was still present in those rooms. Binder stayed close the whole time. He slept at the foot of her bed while I sat at her desk going through the files Nigel had given me: board member names, voting histories, company bylaws. I read slowly and I took notes the way she had taught me, not word for word, systems, structures, how everything connected. On the second evening, I was cross-referencing board member names against old company records when Binder stood up from his spot by the window and walked to the bookshelf on the far wall. He sniffed along the bottom shelf, then sat and looked at me. "Binder." He pawed the shelf once. I walked over. The bottom shelf held Blanche's old business journals, decades of them, spines labeled by year in her handwriting. I had looked at these before, nothing unusual, but Binder's nose was pointed at a gap between the 2016 journal and the wall. I reached in and felt paper. A manila folder, thin, tucked flat against the back of the shelf. Inside were printed emails, dated 2020, between my dad and 2 board members, Nigel and Warren Chen, both of whom were still on the board today. The subject line of the first email read, Blanche Competency Concerns, Confidential. I read every word. My dad had spent months in 2020 trying to build a case that Blanche was mentally unfit to hold her shares. He had gone to board members privately, behind her back, asking them to support a resolution that would transfer her voting rights to him immediately, rather than waiting for her natural passing. Both men had refused. Both men were still on the board. I sat back on the floor with the folder in my lap, Binder pressed against me. She hadn't just written me a will, she'd left me ammunition. I walked into that boardroom at 9:58 a.m. wearing a gray blazer I actually owned and carrying a leather folder Blanche had given me years ago that I had never used. 7 board members, long table, the kind of room designed to make you feel small before anyone says a word. My dad was already seated at the head. He looked at me the way he always had, like I was a problem he'd already solved. Geneva sat beside him. She hadn't been invited. She'd come anyway. "Rosemary," my dad said. His voice was patient, almost gentle, the voice he used with difficult clients. "Whatever this is, whatever someone has convinced you to do, there is still time to walk away from it quietly." I set my folder on the table and sat down. "I'm good," I said. Nigel entered behind me and took the seat to my left. The board chairman, a man named George Tran, cleared his throat. This emergency session was called by Nigel Okafor on behalf of a shareholder. "Mr. Okafor, you have the floor." Nigel stood and placed the will on the table. Then he slid a copy to every board member. "What you have in front of you is the last will and testament of Blanche Gutierrez, executed March 4th, 2021, and legally superseding all prior documents." He let them read for a moment. "It transfers 54% of Gutierrez capital to Rosemary Gutierrez, effective immediately." The room went quiet. My dad's jaw tightened. That document was produced by a woman in cognitive decline under the influence of outside parties who took advantage of her condition. George looked up from the will. "Do you have documentation supporting that claim?" Silence. "Then we'll continue." I reached into my folder and placed the printed emails on the table. These are from 2020. They show an attempt to have Blanche declared incompetent, privately, without her knowledge, by the same person now claiming she lacked mental capacity. 2 board members who had received those original emails looked down at the copies in front of them. My dad's face went a color I had never seen on him before. George Tran set down his pen. "We'll need a recess," he said.
The recess lasted 20 minutes. I stood by the window at the end of the hallway while board members moved in and out of side rooms with phones pressed to their ears. Nigel stood beside me, saying nothing, which was exactly what I needed. Through the glass, I could see the street 31 floors below, cabs, people, the city moving the way it always did, completely unbothered. My dad found me before the 10 minutes were up. He came alone, no lawyers, no Geneva, just him, walking down that hallway the way he always walked, like the floor had been laid specifically for him. He stopped a few feet away and looked at me for a long moment. "You want to tell me what you think you were doing?" he said. "I think it's pretty clear," I said. He exhaled slowly, controlled. "Rosemary, your grandmother was sick. The last 2 years of her life, she was not herself. Whatever that document says, it was not written by the woman I knew. She was examined by 2 independent physicians on the day she signed it. Both certified her competency. Nigel has the documentation." Something moved behind his eyes. He had not known about the physicians. He recalibrated quickly. I watched him do it. "You have no idea how to run a company." His voice shifted, softer now, almost concerned. "You worked in administration. You answered phones. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because it's true. This firm has 400 employees and a $2 billion portfolio. What exactly is your plan?" "I'm not here to run it. I'm here because Blanche left me her shares, and I have a legal obligation to represent them." "You're here for revenge." "I'm here because you fired me 4 days ago without looking at me, and because you've been doing the version of that my entire life." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said it. "You were never going to be what this company needed, Rosemary. That is not cruelty. That is just the truth. Some people are built for this, and some people aren't. We knew that about you early. Your mother and I made peace with it. We tried to help you make peace with it too." I stood there and let the words land. He believed every single one of them. That was the part that hit hardest. Not that he said it, but that there was no malice in his voice when he did. No anger. He was stating a fact, the way you'd state the weather. He had looked at me my entire life and seen a limitation, not a person, a ceiling. "Go home," he said quietly. "Let Nigel withdraw the filing. I'll reinstate your position, we'll sort out a reasonable salary, and this does not have to become something the whole industry knows about." I looked at him. "George is waiting," I said, and I walked back toward the boardroom. The second half of that meeting lasted 40 minutes. George Tran had used the recess to get the company's outside legal counsel on the phone. By the time we reconvened, the attorney had reviewed the will, reviewed the physician's certifications, and reviewed the emails I had placed on the table. His assessment was 4 sentences long. The 2021 will was valid, it superseded the 2017 document, the competency argument had no supporting evidence, and Rosemary Gutierrez was the majority shareholder of Gutierrez Capital effective immediately. My dad sat at the head of that table and listened to every word without moving. Geneva's face was harder to read. She had been quiet the entire session. No interruptions, no challenges, none of the sharpness I had expected from her. She just sat beside my dad and stared at the table. George looked at me. "Miss Gutierrez, as majority shareholder, you have the right to bring motions before this board. Do you have anything to present?" I had thought about this moment for 2 days. I had lain in Blanche's bed at 2 in the morning running through every version of it. The version where I removed my dad as CEO on the spot, the version where I said nothing and let the lawyers handle everything quietly, the version Blanche would have chosen. "Yes," I said. "One motion." I placed the last document on the table, a single page I had written myself at Blanche's desk with binder asleep at my feet. "I am proposing the creation of a new executive oversight committee, 3 board members, independent of family, with authority to review all major decisions going forward.
No single person, including me, holds unchecked authority over this company. George read the page. My dad looked up from the table for the first time. I am also proposing, I continued, that my father remains as CEO for a transition period of 90 days, during which the Oversight Committee is established and a formal leadership review is conducted. The room was completely still. "You're not removing me," he said. It wasn't a question, it was confusion. "Not today," I said. "The board will decide what happens after the review." He stared at me like he was trying to find the angle, the trick, the revenge buried underneath the reasonable language. There wasn't one. George called the vote. 6 in favor, 1 abstention. My dad didn't vote. Motion passed. Afterwards, in the hallway, Geneva stopped me before I reached the elevator. She looked exhausted in a way I had never seen her before. The composure she had worn her entire life had slipped about 2 inches, and underneath she just looked tired. "He really believes what he said to you," she said, "about you not being built for this." "I know he does," I said. "I never believed it," she said. Her voice was low, almost careful. "I just never said so." The elevator arrived. I stepped in. "I know that too," I said. The doors closed between us.
3 days after the board meeting, my mom called at 7 a.m. I was sitting at Blanche's kitchen table with coffee I hadn't touched yet, watching Binder eat breakfast with the focused dedication he brought to everything. Outside the window, the city was just starting. Garbage trucks, pigeons, the particular gray light of early morning in New York. I looked at her name on the screen for 4 rings. Then I picked up. "Rosemary." Her voice was different, smaller, like something structural had shifted underneath it. "Mom." Silence for a moment. "Can we meet?" she said. "Just us, not your father, not Geneva, just you and me." She chose a coffee shop in the West Village, neutral ground, which told me she had thought about this. My mom did not go to the West Village. She considered anything below 57th Street inconvenient. She was already there when I arrived, both hands around a mug she hadn't drunk from. No jewelry except her wedding ring, hair pulled back. She looked like a version of herself I hadn't seen before, stripped of the performance of it. I sat down across from her. She didn't open with an apology. She opened with the truth, which I hadn't expected, and which hit harder because of it. "I knew," she said, "about the way your father treated you. I knew it was wrong, and I told myself it wasn't my place to contradict him, that it would confuse things, that it was better for you to have one clear set of expectations than 2 parents pulling in different directions." She stopped. "That was a lie I told myself so I didn't have to fight him," she said. "I want you to know I understand that now." I wrapped both hands around my own mug. "You laughed," I said, "at the dinner 2 years ago when he introduced me to his partners and called me the family's greatest ongoing experiment. You laughed." She closed her eyes briefly. "Yes," she said. "I spent a week trying to convince myself you were just uncomfortable, that you didn't know what else to do." "I was uncomfortable," she said, "but that's not why I laughed. I laughed because I didn't want him to turn it on me." She opened her eyes. "And I have hated myself for it since." I sat with that for a moment. Here is the thing about finally hearing what you needed to hear. It doesn't feel the way you imagine it will when you're younger and you're lying awake at night rehearsing the conversation. It doesn't feel like relief. It feels like standing in a room where the furniture has all been moved 2 inches. Everything is technically in the right place. Nothing feels right yet. "I don't know what you want from me," I said. "I don't know what this conversation is supposed to produce." "Nothing," she said. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to pretend." She looked directly at me. "I just needed you to know that I saw it, every time, and I chose wrong, and I'm not going to ask you to make that easier for me to live with." I looked at my mother. 58 years old, the woman who had braided my hair when I was small and forgotten my birthday when I was 23. The woman who had dressed me for school and left me out of every conversation that mattered. Both of those women were sitting across from me right now, and I didn't know how to reconcile them into one person I knew how to feel something clean about. "I'm not ready to have a relationship with you, not the kind you're probably hoping for." She nodded. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't let it spill over. "But I'm not done with you either. I don't want to be." She exhaled slowly, like she had been holding that breath for days. We sat there for another hour. We didn't fix anything. We didn't pretend to. We talked carefully, the way you talk when the ground is still uncertain beneath you and you don't want to step wrong. She asked about Blanche's apartment. I told her I was thinking of staying. She told me Blanche had always wanted that. "She talked about you constantly," Mom said near the end. "Your father used to get irritated by it. He thought she was compensating for your struggles." She told him once, I remember the exact words, she said, "Vincent, you are watching the wrong child." I looked down at the table. "I never she told me that," I said. "She wouldn't," Mom said quietly. "She didn't want you to carry the weight of being right while everyone else was wrong. She just wanted you to keep going until you had enough ground under you to stand on." I walked back to Blanche's apartment alone. The morning had warmed up. The streets were full now, people moving, living, unbothered by the particular weight of being a Gutierrez. I let myself in. Binder was waiting, tail going, the full 63-pound greeting. I sat on the floor of the entryway, and he climbed halfway into my lap, which he was far too large for, but attempted anyway with complete confidence. I put my arms around him and pressed my face into the warm, solid fact of him. My grandmother had watched everything. My mother had watched everything and done nothing. Two women who had seen me clearly, one who had fought for me in the only way she had left, one who is only now learning how. I wasn't ready to forgive my mom, but I understood her in a way I hadn't that morning, and somewhere underneath the grief of everything that had been lost, something else was quietly taking shape. 90 days after the board meeting, my dad stepped down as CEO of Gutierrez Capital. It wasn't dramatic, no second confrontation, no lawyers in a room, no final speech. George Tran sent a company-wide email on a Tuesday morning. Vincent Gutierrez would be transitioning out of his executive role. The board thanked him for 19 years of leadership. The oversight committee would guide operations during the search for permanent leadership. I read the email at Blanche's kitchen table with coffee that was actually hot this time. Binder was asleep under my chair, one paw resting on my foot, the way he did when he wanted me to know he was there without making a production of it. I read the email twice. Then I closed my laptop and sat quietly for a while. I had spent so many years imagining what this moment would feel like. In the versions I rehearsed when I was younger, lying awake in my apartment in Queens, too tired to sleep, too angry to let it go, it had always felt like winning, like a door finally opening after years of knocking. The actual feeling was quieter than that, more like setting something heavy down and realizing how long you'd been carrying it. The Oversight Committee had been operating for 6 weeks by then. 3 independent board members, George Tran, a woman named Amanda Reyes, who had joined the board 2 years prior, and Warren Chen, who had refused my dad's emails in 2020 and never mentioned it to anyone. They met every 2 weeks and reviewed every major decision before it moved forward. My role was majority shareholder and what the bylaws now formally listed as Director of Strategic Development, a position I had written the description for myself at Blanche's desk with her 1965 partnership agreement open beside me for reference. The job was not about deals or acquisitions. It was about the inside of the company, how people were hired, how they were treated, whether the people doing the actual work had any voice in the decisions that affected them. Blanche had built this firm on a single floor in Brooklyn with 2 partners and a handshake. Somewhere in 19 years of my dad's leadership, that origin had been buried under the performance of importance. I was trying to find it again. Geneva called me 6 weeks into the transition. She had retained her position as Chief Strategy Officer. That had been my decision, and it had surprised everyone, including her. She said, "I've been thinking about something," when I picked up. "Okay." "The Meridian property. Dad had us in negotiations for 18 months and it stalled because he kept pushing the other party into corners." She paused. "I think I know how to unstall it, but it would require admitting publicly that our previous approach was wrong. Dad would never have allowed that." I said, "Send me the proposal." She sent it within the hour. I read it slowly, the way I read everything, making notes in the margins. It was good. More than good. She had found a way through a problem that had cost the company 2 years and significant legal fees, and the solution required honesty rather than leverage. Blanche would have liked it. I approved it that afternoon. Geneva texted back one line, "Thank you." I stared at it for a moment. 2 words from my sister that carried more weight than any speech either of us could have made. We weren't close yet. I want to be honest about that. We were 2 people learning to be in the same room without the architecture of our parents' preferences between us. It was slow and sometimes uncomfortable, and neither of us pretended otherwise. But it was real. For the first time in my life, it was real. My dad called once a month. Short calls. He asked about the company in the careful way of someone who no longer had access to it. I answered honestly and without cruelty. I did not ask him to apologize. I did not wait for him to do so. He was 61 years old. He had built his identity entirely around a company his mother actually built, and now he was on the outside of both. I did not enjoy that. I want to be clear about that too. I had not done this for enjoyment. Mom and I had lunch every other week. We were building something that didn't have a name yet. Not a close relationship, not a repaired one, just an honest one. She showed up. I showed up. We talked carefully, and sometimes not carefully enough, and we both sat with the discomfort of that without walking away. It was the most real we had ever been with each other. I stayed in Blanche's apartment. I stopped calling it Blanche's apartment. Slowly, in small ways, it became mine. I moved my books onto her shelves. I put a new coffee maker on her counter. I kept her reading lamp exactly where it was. Her portrait, the one that had hung in the boardroom for decades, the one the board had quietly offered to return to the family, hung on the wall of the study where she used to sit with me on Sunday afternoons and teach me to read contracts like architecture. Binder slept under my desk every morning. He had found the safe in the closet. He had led me to the folder on the shelf. He had sat beside me in every hard moment of the last 4 months with the steady, uncomplicated presence of a creature who had no agenda except to be near the person he loved. Blanche had trained him well. She had trained both of us well. Here is what I know now that I didn't know a year ago. The story my family told about me was not the truth. It was a convenience. It was easier to decide I had a ceiling than to examine why they never tried to raise it. My dad confused credentials with character his entire life. He looked at me and saw someone who couldn't keep up. He never once asked what I was doing instead. What I was doing instead was learning to see systems, learning to notice what other people walked past, learning to read rooms, read people, read the space between what was said and what was meant. Blanche saw it from the beginning. She spent years building something that would protect me until I was ready to protect myself. She left me a company not because she wanted me to have power, but because she knew what I would do when I did. I think about her every day. I think about the Sunday afternoons at her kitchen table, contracts spread across the surface, her patient voice walking me through structures and systems while the city moved outside her window. I think about what she wrote at the end of her letter. You are not slow. You are not less. You simply never had anyone in your corner with enough power to prove it.
Now you do. I have thought about those words more times than I can count. In the boardroom, in the hallway after my dad said the truest thing he had ever said about himself, in the coffee shop across from my mother's tired, honest face. The people who underestimate you are not the ones who get to define you. That job was always yours. Binder is asleep under my desk right now, one paw on my foot. Outside the window, I can see the bridge my grandmother crossed every morning in 1965 on her way to a single office in Brooklyn where she was going to build something that lasted. I have her desk, her lamp, her dog. And finally, for the first time in my life, I have enough ground under me to stand on. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe so you're here for the next one. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me about a moment you finally stopped waiting for someone else to see your worth, because your story matters too. Take care of yourself, and never forget, the people who underestimate you are not the ones who get to define you. That job was always yours.